The room went completely silent the moment Joe Louis stepped forward. It wasn't the kind of silence caused by fear or confusion. It was anticipation. The kind that creeps in when something important is about to happen, even if no one can explain why. Sweat clung to the wooden floor. The air was heavy with focus, discipline, and unspoken respect. This wasn't a tournament. No trophies. No judges. No cameras rolling. Yet, in that small training hall, history was quietly lining itself up. Bruce Lee stood at the front of the room, relaxed as always. His posture was loose, almost casual, but every student knew better. Behind that calm exterior was speed no one could measure and precision no stopwatch could catch. He wasn't lecturing. He was teaching through movement, through understanding, through presence. Among the students stood Joe Louis, a man already feared and respected in the martial arts world. A champion. A competitor forged by discipline and confidence. His speed had earned him titles. His reputation had earned him silence whenever he spoke. He took a step forward. Heads turned. Bruce paused mid-explanation, eyes lifting slowly. Not challenged, curious. Joe's lips curled into a half-smile. Not disrespectful. Not hostile. Honest. "Bruce," he said calmly, clearly, "I'm faster than you." A few students inhaled sharply. Others froze, unsure if they had just witnessed confidence or sacrilege. Bruce Lee didn't flinch. No raised voice. No tightening of fists. No shift into a fighting stance. He simply smiled. Not the smile of someone amused, but the smile of someone who understood something the room had not yet caught up to. For a brief moment, time seemed to stretch. The kind of moment that later gets replayed in memories, told again and again with the same words, "I was there." This wasn't about ego. It wasn't about dominance. And it definitely wasn't about proving who was better. It was about truth. Two masters stood only a few feet apart, one confident in his speed, the other confident in his understanding of speed itself. The student sensed it instantly. Whatever happened next would not involve violence, but it would change how everyone in that room thought about martial arts forever. Bruce's eyes met Joe's. Calm. Focused. Unshaken. And in that quiet space between them, a lesson was already beginning, long before anyone moved. It was a regular training session in Los Angeles. No banners. No press. No special announcements. Just sweat on the floor and focus hanging thick in the air. The room itself was simple. Wooden floors worn down by years of footwork, mirrors lining the walls, the faint smell of effort and discipline lingering from countless sessions before. Students stood barefoot, uniforms damp, eyes locked forward. This was not a place for ego. This was a place for learning. At the front stood Bruce Lee. Not posing. Not performing. Teaching. He moved as he spoke, demonstrating concepts with fluid motions, speed without tension, power without strain, control without stiffness. His philosophy wasn't about brute force. It was about efficiency. About ending a fight before it truly began. Speed, Bruce explained, is not how fast your arm moves. It's how little your mind delays. The students watched closely, trying to absorb every word, every subtle movement. For many of them, this wasn't just a class. It was a rare chance to understand combat from a man rewriting martial arts itself. Among them stood Joe Louis. Even in a room full of skilled fighters, Joe was impossible to miss. His posture was confident, his presence grounded. He wasn't arrogant, but he knew who he was. A world-class karate champion. A man whose speed had already defeated the best of the best. Joe had trained his whole life to be faster than his opponent. Faster hands. Faster reactions. Faster decisions. As Bruce continued explaining timing and interception, Joe listened carefully. Not dismissively, critically. He wasn't looking for flaws, but comparisons. Measuring what he saw against everything he knew. Finally, Joe crossed his arms. It wasn't dramatic. It wasn't loud. But it was enough. Bruce stopped mid-step and turned his head slightly. Joe spoke with respect, his tone steady and controlled. "With respect, Sifu. I think I'm faster than you." The words landed like a stone dropped into still water. The room froze. Some students looked at Bruce, waiting for a reaction. Others looked at Joe, unsure if they just witnessed courage or crossed a line. This wasn't trash talk. This wasn't an insult. It was an honest statement from one master to another. Before we go any further, comment where you're watching from, and if you respect true martial arts legends, hit like and subscribe so these real stories of discipline and humility never disappear. Oncoming fist. Bruce Lee didn't respond immediately. He studied Joe for a moment, eyes calm, assessing, not judging. There was no offense taken, no irritation. If anything, there was interest. Then Bruce nodded. "Good," he said simply. The word carried no sarcasm, no challenge, just acceptance. Joe uncrossed his arms slightly, unsure what would come next. Bruce continued, his voice calm, almost gentle. "Belief is important, but belief must be tested." He took a single step forward. "Let's test that." The students straightened instinctively. Whatever this was about to be, it wasn't part of the lesson plan, but it was about to become the lesson. Bruce raised his hand slowly, deliberately, 2 fingers extended, pointing lightly toward Joe's chest. Not a fist. Not a blade. Just a simple gesture. "No power," Bruce said calmly. "Just speed." There was no ego in his voice, no need to dominate the moment. This wasn't a fight, and it wasn't a duel. It was a demonstration, one rooted in clarity, not aggression. Joe studied the hand carefully. He nodded once. "If you can touch me before I react," Joe said evenly, "you win." The terms were simple, almost humble. No points, no excuses, just reality. Both men relaxed. No fighting stances, no flexed muscles, no dramatic circling. They stood naturally, feet planted, bodies loose, the way real speed demanded. Tension, Bruce had often taught, was the enemy of movement. And Joe knew that as well. He let his shoulders drop, his breathing slow, his focus sharpen. Around them, the class leaned in. You could hear the soft creak of the floor beneath shifting weight, the faint hum of the lights overhead. Every student felt it. This was no longer a lesson from a book or a story from a magazine. This was knowledge about to be revealed in real time. Joe locked his eyes on Bruce's shoulders. Not his hands. Not his eyes. The shoulders were the truth-tellers. The first sign of intent. Joe had trained himself to read them faster than most people could blink. The moment they moved, his body would react. Block. Counter. Evade. He had won championships that way. Bruce noticed where Joe's focus rested and said nothing. His face remained relaxed, almost serene. If there was tension inside him, it didn't show. The silence stretched. Seconds felt longer. This was the space where fear usually entered, the moment before action. But neither man allowed it. There was only awareness. Bruce inhaled slowly. Then, softly, almost casually, he asked, "Ready?" Joe nodded. That nod was more than agreement. It was confidence. Joe trusted his reflexes. He trusted his speed. He trusted the countless hours that had trained his body to move without thought. In his mind, he was already prepared. If he moves, I move. Bruce shifted his weight ever so slightly, not enough to signal intent. His shoulders didn't rise. His breathing didn't change. His eyes didn't narrow. To the students watching, it looked like nothing was happening. But in that stillness, something crucial was unfolding. Joe waited for the cue. A twitch. A shoulder turn. A hint of motion. Nothing. Bruce stood there, fingers still extended, relaxed like a man waiting for a bus rather than testing the limits of human reaction time. Joe's mind stayed sharp, alert, ready to explode into motion at the smallest signal. And that was the point. Bruce wasn't preparing to move fast. He was removing everything that made movement slow. No hesitation. No telegraph. No intention broadcast ahead of time. Just action. The class held its breath. In that suspended moment, the difference between trained speed and mastered speed was about to reveal itself, not through force, not through flash, but through something far more unsettling. Effortless certainty. And then, without warning, the test began. Before Joe's brain could finish the thought now. Tap. Bruce's fingers were already touching Joe's chest. Not crashing. Not striking. Not forcing. Just a light, undeniable contact. No wind-up. No blur of motion the eyes could chase. No sound except the softest touch of skin on fabric. It was simply done. For a split second, Joe's body froze, not because he was slow, but because his mind hadn't been invited to the moment. The signal never arrived. The warning never came. The action had already ended before reaction could exist. Joe didn't move. He didn't blink. His eyes stayed locked forward, as if his nervous system was replaying what should have happened, trying to locate the missing frame in time. His muscles were primed to respond, yet there had been nothing to respond to. Around them, the room shattered into gasps. Hands flew to mouths. Feet shifted back unconsciously. A few students laughed nervously, unsure if what they'd just seen was even real. Some blinked hard, convinced they had missed it. Others stared at Bruce, waiting for an explanation that didn't come. Bruce withdrew his hand as calmly as he had extended it. No follow-through. No flourish. He stepped back and placed his hands behind his back, posture loose, breathing slow, like a teacher who had just finished drawing a simple line on a chalkboard. Completely relaxed. Joe finally exhaled. He glanced down at his chest, then back up at Bruce, disbelief mixing with curiosity. His body hadn't failed him. That was the unsettling part. His training was intact. His reactions were sharp. But they had been irrelevant. Bruce hadn't moved faster than Joe could react. He had moved before reaction existed. The students whispered among themselves. "Did you see his shoulders move?" "I didn't see anything." "How is that possible?" Bruce turned slightly toward the class, still calm. "You were waiting," he said softly, not accusing, explaining. "Waiting is already slow." Joe nodded slowly, the realization sinking in. His eyes weren't wide with embarrassment. They were focused, analytical, respectful. "I was ready," Joe admitted. Bruce smiled faintly. "That's why you lost the moment." The words weren't harsh. They were precise. Bruce continued, pacing lightly as if resuming a lecture. "Speed is not about being prepared to respond. It's about not needing to respond at all." He gestured with his hand again, slowly this time, showing how tension creates delay, how intention telegraphs movement, how the mind's hesitation adds invisible weight to the body. Joe watched every gesture now, not as a challenger, but as a student. What had just happened wasn't a trick. It wasn't a magic move. It was the removal of excess, of thought, of tension, of ego. Bruce hadn't tried to be faster. He had simply acted without delay. The room felt different now. Quieter. Heavier. Sharper. The students understood they hadn't witnessed a party trick. They had seen a principle that applied far beyond martial arts. A principle about timing, awareness, and the cost of hesitation. Bruce stopped and looked back at Joe. "You are fast," he said sincerely. "Very fast." Joe inclined his head slightly. "But," Bruce added, "speed ends where thought begins." Joe nodded again, this time deeply. In that moment, there was no winner standing and no loser humbled. There was only understanding passing silently from one master to another. And the lesson lingered in the air long after the movement itself had disappeared. Joe Louis stared down at his chest, eyes fixed on the exact spot where Bruce's fingers had touched him. He wasn't checking for pain. There was none. He was searching for time. Then he looked back up at Bruce. Something had changed, not in the room, but inside him. His confidence didn't shatter. It transformed. Joe exhaled slowly, a quiet breath filled with understanding rather than frustration. "I didn't even see you move." There was no bitterness in his voice. No embarrassment. Only honesty. For a man who had built his entire career on speed, admitting that meant more than losing a match. It meant redefining everything he thought he knew. Bruce smiled. Not proudly. Not triumphantly. Patiently. "That's because speed isn't about muscles," Bruce said. "It's about removing hesitation." The words settled heavily in the room. Bruce continued, speaking as if he were thinking aloud. "When the mind prepares, the body waits. When the mind decides, the body follows. But when there is no decision, only action, speed becomes invisible. Joe listened closely, eyes locked on Bruce's face, absorbing each sentence like a lesson earned the hard way. 4 years, Joe had trained to be faster than his opponent. Faster reactions. Faster counters. Faster recovery. But Bruce had shown him something deeper. That reaction itself was a limitation. Joe nodded slowly. "I was ready to respond," he said. Bruce nodded back. And that's where time entered. The students around them were no longer whispering. They were silent again, not from tension, but from clarity. This wasn't about two great fighters anymore. It was about understanding a principle that applied to everything: combat, competition, life. If this moment surprised you, comment "Legend" below, and don't forget to like and subscribe for more true martial arts stories that never make the movies. Fire. Joe stepped back and bowed deeply. Not the casual nod of acknowledgement, a full bow. Respectful. Genuine. It wasn't submission. It was recognition. In that bow, Joe wasn't lowering himself, he was elevating his understanding. Bruce returned the bow lightly, equally respectful. From that day forward, Joe Louis didn't just speak highly of Bruce Lee, he defended him, supported him, and openly credited him as one of the greatest martial artists he had ever encountered. Years later, Joe would tell this story not as a defeat, but as a turning point. He would explain how that single tap changed how he approached training, teaching, and competition. How he stopped chasing speed and started removing what slowed him down. Bruce never brought the moment up again. He didn't need to. For him, the lesson had already been delivered, quietly, precisely, without spectacle. And for everyone who witnessed it, the realization was clear. True mastery doesn't overpower. It reveals. And sometimes, the fastest thing in the room is the absence of hesitation itself. Bruce didn't celebrate. There was no raised hand. No satisfied grin. No victory pose. He didn't mock Joe. He didn't repeat the demonstration. In fact, Bruce acted as if nothing extraordinary had happened at all. He simply turned back toward the class, the same calm presence he had carried before the challenge, and spoke as if continuing a lesson that had never been interrupted. "Never compare yourself to others," he said evenly. "Compare yourself to who you were yesterday." The words cut deeper than any strike could have. The students absorbed them in silence, understanding that what they had just witnessed was not meant to elevate one man over another, it was meant to strip ego from the process of growth. Bruce wasn't interested in being seen as faster, better, or superior. He was interested in clarity. Joe stood quietly among them, no longer at the center of attention, and perfectly at peace with that. There was no embarrassment on his face. No defensiveness. If anything, there was gratitude. Because Joe understood something few competitors ever did. Being corrected by a master is not humiliation, it's a gift. Bruce continued teaching, walking slowly across the floor, explaining how obsession with comparison creates blind spots. How measuring yourself against others keeps your attention outward, when mastery demands it turn inward. When you chase someone else's level, Bruce said, you ignore your own limitations. The class listened differently now. The lesson wasn't theoretical anymore. It had been proven. Joe later admitted, years after that day, "That moment changed how I understood speed, humility, and mastery forever." Coming from a world champion, those words carried weight. Joe explained that before meeting Bruce, speed meant training harder, pushing faster, reacting sharper. After that day, speed meant letting go of tension, of anticipation, of ego. It meant trusting the present moment completely. No punch had been thrown. No kick had been exchanged. No sweat had been spilled in combat. Yet everyone in that room had learned more in those few seconds than in weeks of drills. Bruce had shown them that true authority doesn't need to assert itself. It doesn't need applause. It doesn't even need acknowledgement. It exists quietly, undeniable once experienced. Joe remained for the rest of the class, training alongside the others, no longer as a challenger, but as a student again. And in doing so, he earned something far more valuable than dominance. He earned respect, not just from Bruce, but from himself. When the session ended, Bruce bowed to the class, thanked them, and left without ceremony. No speeches. No storytelling. No reminders of what had happened. Because for Bruce Lee, the lesson was never about the moment, it was about what the moment unlocked in others. And for those who witnessed it, the memory stayed with them not as a spectacle, but as a quiet truth. Mastery is not proven by defeating others. It's revealed by how little you need to prove at all. That day, without a single strike thrown, respect was earned, and wisdom was passed on in silence. True masters don't need to prove themselves loudly. They don't raise their voices. They don't demand attention. They don't chase validation. They let truth speak in silence. What happened in that training hall was never about winning or losing. Bruce Lee didn't defeat Joe Louis, he educated him. And in doing so, he reminded everyone watching what real mastery looks like. Strength, when it's genuine, doesn't need an audience. It doesn't need to announce itself with noise or aggression. It reveals itself quietly, in moments of clarity that stay with you long after the room empties. Bruce Lee could have humiliated Joe. He could have proven his superiority repeatedly. He chose not to, because ego was never the goal. The goal was understanding. Joe Louis walked into that room as a champion, fast, disciplined, confident. He walked out with something even more valuable: perspective. The ability to recognize that growth doesn't end at victory, and mastery doesn't stop at titles. That is the difference between skill and wisdom. Bruce's lesson reached beyond martial arts. It spoke to life itself. To how often people rush to prove themselves, to compare, to compete, without realizing that the loudest need to prove something are often the least secure. Real power is calm. Real confidence is quiet. Real strength is humble. If you believe real strength comes from humility, type respect in the comments, like the video, and subscribe so these timeless lessons keep reaching new generations. Folded hands. Because stories like this aren't just entertainment, they're reminders. Reminders that greatness isn't measured by domination, but by the ability to uplift, teach, and inspire without tearing others down. Legends don't fade because time passes. They fade only when we stop telling their stories. And as long as these lessons are shared, remembered, and lived, Bruce Lee's philosophy, and the wisdom of moments like this, will never disappear.